I mentioned the Flyers have made 3 trades in 3 days, and they almost always involve defensemen. What is going on with the Flyers? Kevin Durso is back for, I believe, the 3rd straight day here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN, because Kevin, apparently the Flyers just can't stop doing stuff. So tell us about who now, if I may say his name, Rasmus Ristolainen. Is that how I say his name?
You got it right, Rasmus Ristolainen.
All right, so who is he, and why did the Flyers trade Robert Hagen, the 13th overall pick, for him?
Well, he's a big guy, obviously. I mean, if you take a look at him, he's just massive on ice. He's a big physical presence. And obviously, you know, if I can headline what the pros of this player are, that's what it is. If ever anybody thought that this team was soft last year, anybody thought that this team lacked the physicality, whether on the blue line, up front, doesn't really matter, lacked physicality in general, which I believe they did, then you got a player who's going to take care of part of that problem for sure, because he's not going to let guys get pushed around. He's not going to get pushed around himself. That's obvious. Everything else, though, is kind of questionable because, first of all, he played in Buffalo, and Buffalo struggled as much as the Flyers, if not more. I mean, let's put it this way. This was kind of like kind of the loser bowl, if you will, because, I mean, at the end of March, Buffalo was on an 18-game losing streak, and then the Flyers lost to Buffalo 6-1 to snap that losing streak. So, you know, it was frustrating for both franchises. It's been kind of it's just been a whole thing with him and the Sabres, with how the Sabres have struggled over the years. He's been a huge part of it because he's been on the team for 8 years. He's not an analytics darling. He's not going to be a guy, you know, he's considered a liability at both ends. So it's not, you know, on the surface, this is not a good trade. There's just no way around it. It's not a good trade because of the fact that, to me, this is not what you use the 13th overall pick on. I don't have a problem with trading Robert Haig. I don't have a problem with trading a 2023 second-round pick. There's really, you know, you can't look at those draft picks down the line and go crazy about that when you have holes to fill and you've got to try to do it in whatever way possible. The first round pick, I should say, so at 13th overall, technically 14th, if you will, because of there's a forfeited pick in there for Arizona at 11th. The thing about that pick is that really needed to be a substantial move. And so far, that was the thing I kept coming back to with the Flyers and Chuck Fletcher was you've made 2 trades to this point, and the worst thing that you've given up, as far as I can tell, is you've given up on Phil Myers' potential maybe down the line to get a player who kind of fits the same bill as a Phil Myers, just shorter, and plays, you know, right-handed defenseman, can play the top pairing minutes. So you're kind of taking the leap of faith that you got the more established player for a guy who you would have hoped panned out and became that guy. That was really the worst that they had given up. Shane Gostisbehere, we kind of figured, was on the way out. You had to sweeten the deal with 2 draft picks, but so be it. You got $4.5 million in cap space for it. You kind of had something. We all figured something's lined up here. And then you made a trade and utilized this first pick on a player who I can't say for certain makes you better. You're taking a risk on this player that getting out of Buffalo is going to either make him better or it's going to make the Buffalo Sabres better. It's one or the other. So you're taking the gamble that this is going to make him better and make your team better. And quite frankly, you better be right, because it's an offseason of action and it's an offseason about making the right choices to get better. And if you get this wrong, then everybody in the organization is kind of on the line. Ristolainen needs to have better success in Philadelphia now that he's out of Buffalo to prove that this was not the player that he can be. He can be a better player. Alain Vigneault is going to need to get the most out of this team one way or another, and you're going to have new faces on the blue line. You're going to have a lot of the same faces at forward now, it appears, and you've got to make an impact with it, or, again, we're going to see probably changes. And Chuck Fletcher is making a huge gamble, in my opinion, on this particular player. The Ellis trade was outstanding. This one, a lot more questionable, because you've traded a draft pick in certainly an uncertain draft year. There's a lot of up and down with this where guys are going to go, and you might be able to get a find in the 4th round as much as you do in the 1st round, because a lot of guys weren't seen a lot this year, maybe didn't even play this year, who are getting drafted. But, man, you just really put it on the line right now with this deal.
So if I'm reading what you're saying here a little bit, and you can tell me if I'm reading this wrong, your issue isn't the player as much as trading the 13th overall pick, right? Your issue is, listen, Ristolainen, I would assume Ristolainen's an upgrade over Robert Haig, right? Like he's a better player, but the issue you're having is, did you really have to give up that 1st round pick to get Ristolainen?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, here's the thing with me. Robert Haig I said yesterday to me, he's a seventh defenseman. And if you have to move that guy to make cap work in any deal, go ahead and do it. I really don't have a problem with that. It's a matter of what you're doing with the cap now, because you got this $4.5 million in space by making this trade yesterday, and now you've utilized all of it, essentially, on a player who is questionable in his abilities at both ends of the ice and who really needs to turn his career around right now. And it's now or never for him. He's in an age range where he's supposed to be hitting the prime of his career. He's 26. He really needs to have a year in order to see where his career goes, because he's a free agent following this upcoming season. So this is, for right now, based on everything that I can gather, because it doesn't sound like they're going to make an extension with him anytime soon, this is kind of like a tryout for him to see if he's got a future in Philadelphia, or if this is a one-off and you just traded Robert Haig and 2 draft picks, including a first-rounder, for a rental. And I don't know if this is worth the rental price. This is, you really, what doesn't add up to me is Ristolainen's considered a defensive liability in a lot of ways. And, all you have to do, and look, plus minus is not a number that people like to go off of. The analytics guys who utilize that for the end-all be-all of evaluating players don't use plus minus. He's got a horrible plus minus. I believe he's like a minus 163 in his career, which is awful. But you look at the team he played on and you understand a little bit of it, but nonetheless, he needs a turnaround. And when you look at this guy and you have to put a lot on him being there, this is the type of player that you needed an impact. You came into the offseason saying the priority is cut down on goals against. This does not scream cut down on goals against. So that's where you're taking the risk, is because that's what you said your big thing was, and you just invested all of the money you just got yesterday in this trade for Gostisbehere into Rasmus Ristolainen.
Flyers insider Kevin Durso joining us here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN at Kevin_Durso on Twitter. While your Flyers and NHL coverage also over on the website 97.3ESPN.com, the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. Again, the Flyers acquiring Rasmus Ristolainen in a trade that, Kevin, it seems like a lot of people are conflicted about on social media. If you scroll through Twitter, there's a one camp that are like you. They're saying you gave up a lot to get a guy who might not be here long term. And then on the flip side, you have other people who are like, you needed someone like this to change things up. So, what do you think the pairings are going to be on the D-line if there's no other moves made? Because I'm assuming that it would be, Ryan Ellis and Provorov on the first line, and then Ristolainen and Sanheim on the second line?
That would be the early guess. I can't be certain about that, because we'll kind of have to see what happens come September when Alain Vigneault gets his hands on this group and can put together, that's what his job is to do at this point, is to put that together how he sees fit. But that would be the natural fit. I mean, the thing about Ristolainen at this point is that the other thing you're hoping is not only the change of scenery helps, but maybe a slightly reduced role. But it doesn't make that big of an impact when you are the type of player he was in Buffalo and performing that poorly from a goals against standpoint. Changing the role isn't going to change that much in that area. So he really needs to hope that, and Chuck Fletcher's thing during his press conference was that maybe, here's a guy, because he played in Buffalo and we've seen the way that the Buffalo organization has operated over the last few years. They haven't had success. They've gone through 6 coaches in his time in Buffalo. He's played with multiple defensive partners. So what they're trying to say is maybe some stability will help him be a better player. I would hope that's the case. Like, listen, I'm not going to sit here and tell you I don't want this trade to work out for the Flyers. Of course, everybody should want it to work out. On the surface, it's just not what you give up your first-round pick for. And that was my thing. I kind of looked at, and I'll pull it in front of me really quick just to go through the whole thing, because the collective offseason to this point now, you brought in Ristolainen now with Ryan Ellis, and that's the 2 additions. To do that, you gave up Shane Gostisbehere, Phil Myers, Robert Haig, Nolan Patrick, your first-round pick this year, a second next year, a 7th next year, and a second in the following year. It's a lot to give up to get 2 players back, and to have one of those players be a player as polarizing as Ristolainen seems to be coming in, because really there's 2 sides you can take, and this is the way it's going to be viewed, probably, like as you said, scrolling through social media. There's going to be one half that's going to say this is the type of guy they need because he's physical and they lacked that last season. And then there's the others that know the analytics of it, that know the defensive struggles, that know how he's been at the center of the Buffalo Sabres in all of their years of mediocrity and beyond, that look at this and go, how is this supposed to be a fit? How does this help a team that was one of the worst in goals against a year ago get any better in that category? And that's where the first round pick becomes problematic, because I wouldn't have moved that first round pick unless you were getting something very significant in return, and getting something to me that was quite possibly, if the Buffalo deal would have been, oh, by the way, Sam Reinhart's in this deal with Rasmus Ristolainen, and it cost a first, and maybe there's another player involved in that too, aside from Robert Haig, to make the money work. That's the type of package that you go, all right, that fills two holes. That gives you a second pairing defenseman who you're taking a shot on, and a second or third center that you can build around. Now you got something with that first round pick. I feel like they got nothing for this first round pick as of yet, and they're banking on a turnaround to make it work.
Flyers insider Kevin Durso joining us here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN FM, at Kevin_Durso on Twitter. All of his Flyers coverage over at 97.3 ESPN.com. Kevin, we only got about a minute and a half before we hit the end of the hour, so I want to ask you, is this a reflection on who Chuck Fletcher is? We've heard the criticism of Chuck Fletcher when he got hired, right? The idea was he put Minnesota in the cap hell, right? The idea was that he was not the positive reviews coming out of Minnesota. So is this a reflection, this trade, of who Chuck Fletcher is, that he makes these kind of moves that are questionable? This is just part of who he is.
That's tough to say, because, see, the thing with Minnesota was he backed himself into a corner with the cap because of two big contracts signed in free agency that let's just say, you can't even sign deals like that anymore because the CBA does not allow for more than, if you're signing a player from the outside, the max a free agent can get is 7 years. And if you're signing from within to get an extension, the max is 8 years. He signed two 13-year deals way back when with Zach Parise and Ryan Suter. And so that can't happen anymore. So you kind of can't back yourself into that kind of corner necessarily in free agency anymore. But certainly, one thing I've noticed about Chuck Fletcher in terms of him trying to improve this team whatever way he sees fit, and he feels like that this move is an improvement. And, look, going back to the Ryan Ellis one, I think we all agreed that was a huge improvement from what you had a year ago. This is a little bit different. But everything has been trades. Matt Niskanen was a trade. Justin Braun was a trade. Kevin Hayes, it was a trade for a guy's rights to then get the ability to negotiate and sign him as a free agent ultimately. But you made a trade to get his rights. Everything's been through the trade avenue, and that's a little interesting because it's just, you run the risk of losing something that maybe you don't anticipate, and that's the thing here. Buffalo already has the first overall pick tonight. Now they just added a 13th, and who knows what else they could get on top of it. And now they could add at two different positions. That doesn't mean they're going to be out of the woods and become a playoff team tomorrow. I highly doubt that, but maybe they get pieces that they build around, they get more success out of it. And I don't know that the Flyers took any step further in where they're trying to go with this particular move, as opposed to what they did with the Ryan Ellis move last weekend, where you clearly took a step in the right direction, and now it feels like you almost took a step back to where you were with this one. And like I said, hope he proves me wrong and proves everybody else who says that it's an awful trade wrong, but everything that's on the surface says this is the guy he is, and it's not looking good for the Flyers on the surface anyway for what you gave up.
More Flyers coverage right now at 97.3 ESPN.com, the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. Thanks to our Flyers insider, Kevin Durso, for joining us late in the show. Obviously, a crazy day for the Flyers. Kevin, appreciate it.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate the time.